Okay, so we didn't have a class last week, but we are picking up where we left off 2 weeks before. We're in the middle of the sugya of, hold on, let's bring up the page. Hey, Avi, it's about to start. Bring up the page here. Okay, we were holding after the second Mishnah on page Hey Amud Aleph. So we know that we pushed forward the reading of the Megillah for the villagers 11, 12, 13. And if there's Shabbos, we push also for back. But if for other things get pushed forward. So, for instance, we learned about the Chagiga. So the Mishnah mentions about the Chagiga. So we finished off last week about the trees, the donations that were given to the Mizbeach, or Tisha B'Av falls out on Shabbos. So the Mishnah is now going to break down the details. So we learned like this. The Gemara is going to break down. Tana, we learned in a Brisa. Chagiga v'chol zman chagiga ma'achrin. So the peace offering, which is the shlomim, which is the holiday sacrifice, and so and the entire time of the period of the festival peace offering gets ma'achrin pushed forward. So what does it mean? The peace offering, the chagiga, which is the name of the piece of the sacrifice for Yom Tiv, and the time of the chagiga get pushed forward. So the Gemara says, "Bishlei chagiga." I understand the actual sacrifice. The what does it mean? The mikle b'shabta. If Shabbos falls out on the first day of Chag of the Yom Tiv, so ma'achrin al lebasa shabta. So then we push off. When does the individual? This is an individual sacrifice. Means we have the holiday sacrifices, that's Korban Tzibur for Yom Tif that gets sacrificed in its proper time. Here we're talking about the Chagiga, which is the individual's sacrifice gets pushed off Levasa Shabta to Sunday, or then after Shabbos. Zman Chagiga Mahi, what does it mean? The time of the Chagiga sacrifice gets pushed forward. It's like Rashi says, Bishlei Chagiga Dektani Ma'achrim Me'ikle B'Shabbos. It makes sense that if Shabbos falls, that if the Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, we push it forward. Now, why don't we do a Chagiga sacrifice on the Yom Tov itself? We're going to learn in a second. Means the Torah tells us that a person comes in, just to give a breakdown. A person comes for the 3 holidays of Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuos. One has to bring 2 types of sacrifices. There's the Korban Oilas Riyah, which is the burnt sacrifice for when you come to the temple. You bring an oila. The entire sacrifice gets burnt on the altar. There's no part of the sacrifice that goes to the person, the individual. The chagiga is a shlomim. A shlomim, only parts of it gets burnt and goes to the kohen, but the majority of the animal goes to the person who brings it, and that is their simchas chag. That is what they celebrate the holiday with, which is supposed to be v'samachta, b'basar, b'yayin. When it says you're happy with meat and with wine, the part of the meat is the meat of the korban chagiga. So if the korban falls out, if the Yom Tov falls out in the week, again, as much as they can, they try to get as many people to sacrifice on the first day. That's its zman, and then you keep on pushing it. You have up to 7 days throughout the holiday to bring your korban. You don't have to bring it on the first day. The mitzvah is the first day, but you have the tashlumim. You have the 7-day period where everyone should be able to, in that 7 days, get their sacrifices sacrificed. But if it falls out the first day on Yom Tiv, falls out on Shabbos, no one of private individuals will sacrifice their Yom Tov sacrifices on the Shabbos, because you can't sacrifice on the Shabbos. The reason where it's permissible to sacrifice the holiday sacrifice on the holiday itself is because it says lachem, that this is something for you. So something that's for you on Yom Tov, you're allowed. For you on Yom Tov to slaughter, you're not allowed to slaughter for yourself meat on Shabbos. So Rabbi Yehudah explains, so that makes sense why the Chagiga gets pushed off. What does it mean the time of Chagiga gets pushed off? So Rabbi Yehudah explains. Rabbi Yehudah explains, Hachikamer, this is what the Brisa means to teach us. Chagiga b'Shabbos, that if the Chagiga falls out on Shabbos, it gets pushed off to Sunday. That's the shlomim. Again, that's the sacrifice that a majority of the meat is eaten by the person who brings it for him and his family. The oilas riyah, what about the oila, which is a burnt sacrifice, which you also have to bring on the holiday? Afila b'Yom Tov d'zman chagiga ma'achrin. Even on the holiday itself, meaning it's not Shabbos, it's the middle of the week, we do not sacrifice the burnt sacrifice on Yom Tov. Rashi is going to explain why. And what is the issues? We're going to explain why. So and who's this opinion? We're going to explain it right now in a second. Hold on, let's let a few more people in. Okay. The Rashi explains like this. Afilu b'Yom Tov, even on the holiday, the Zman Chagi, meaning that we do not sacrifice the burnt sacrifice on the holiday. The Zman Chagiga, hu shemutir lahakriv shalmi chagiga. The only thing that's permissible on the Yom Tov itself, again, we're talking about, let's say, we're going to learn this obviously applies to Shavuos as well. We know that all the holidays have a 7-day tashlumim. But let's just say on Sukkot or Pesach. So you have the first day of Yom Tov, and you have the 6 days that continue into the Chol HaMoed in the last days, right? So only on the Chagiga, which is a shlamim, lahakriv shalmi Chagiga, is allowed on the Yom Tov. But nevertheless, although the shlamim we can do on Yom Tov, but the oila riyah, meaning the burnt sacrifice, which is a second sacrifice that you have to bring when you come, it's obligatory to bring when you come on the holiday, that doesn't get sacrificed for the individual until Chol Shamoed, until the Moed, the Chol Moed, which is after the first day of the holiday in Eretz Yisrael. And this is what the Mishnah the Brisa means to say. Chagigam achrim, we push off the chagiga, the shlamim, if it falls out on Shabbos, because even for the individual, you can't do even though we have a limud lachem, it's only for Yom Tov. There's another sacrifice that we also push it off. Even if its time, in theory, should be now, we push off its time. And what is that? That is the oilis riyah. It's a kind of play of the words, meaning that we push off it. There's never time for you to sacrifice your burnt sacrifice on the first day of holiday. You're not allowed to. She chayves regel, even though it's an obligation of the holiday to bring that sacrifice. How do we know? Like it says, la yiru panei rekim, don't come empty-handed. And the Talmud teaches us in Chagiga, which deals with these laws. You have to bring both burnt sacrifices and other sacrifices. Nevertheless, we don't sacrifice it on the Yom Tov. And who is this opinion? The Gemara is going to tell us. Beis Shammai, this is the house of Shammai. The Amri ein makrivim b'Yom Tov oilis oila hayochel lavi lemachar v'afilu hi chayvis haregel. That's Beis Shammai who says that although you have an obligation to bring the holiday, the oila, the burnt sacrifice, but you don't have to do it today. You can do it tomorrow. Do it tomorrow. Okay. What is this? What is this whole argument about? What's the issue here? So we're going to learn in a second what the issue is. This is actually the first argument in the Torah, meaning to say that up until we know that the tradition, like the Rambam brings, and we have it in Pirkei Avos, that we had from Moshe Rabbeinu to Joshua, and then the tradition of Torah stayed tight, meaning to say you had who was in charge of the tradition. The Rambam gives us a list of the people that were the keepers of the tradition, all the way down until the destruction of the first base of Megillah. After the destruction of base of Megillah, it kind of cultivated into the members of the Great Assembly, the Anshe Knesset Gdolah. From the Anshe Knesset Gdolah continued, like we say in the first chapter of Pirkei Avos, we had the Shimon HaTzadik and the Genois Shteichai that continued with the tradition, and then started the Zugos. Then started the peers. There was one person who was the Nasi, and the next person was the Av Bezdin. The first machlaikes, disagreement of a law, is around these questions about what if we could do the sacrifice of the shlamim or the oilas on the Yom Tov. So let's see what the argument is. Let's first see. We're going to get back to this Tosfos in a second because we have to first get some basis of the information. Mani, and who is this opinion? Gemara says this is the opinion of Beis Shammai, the house of Shammai. We know that the house of Shammai, obviously, after Yosef ben Yozer and Yosef Ish Yerushalayim, the two Yosis that were the Zugos, the pair, it came down to Hillel and Shammai. And Hillel and Shammai started the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, which that's really where arguments, kind of disagreements of the law started, until kind of it was brought back together after the destruction. That lasted for 100 years. Hillel and Shammai were about 100 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. Only in the days of Rabban Gamliel, after Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai in Yavna, when things were really in a dire situation after the destruction of the second base Hamikdash, and in the time of Bar Kokhba, the time of the Dor Hashmad, Rabban Gamliel kind of locked down that very strict that everyone has to listen to the Nasi the ruling of Hillel when the law was according to the house of Hillel, the ruling of Shammai when it was according to Shammai, but majority of the times the house of Hillel was the law. But who is the opinion that says that you would push off the riyah, the burnt sacrifice, till the Chol HaMoed? It's Beishamai. The Tnan we learned, Beishamai Oimrim Meviim Shlomim B'Yom Tov Ve'ein Seimchem Aleim. You bring the korban shlomim, the sacrifice that is the chagiga, we know it as the chagiga, which is the shlomim, which is the one that we eat from. We bring it on, the peace offering is brought. Ve'ein tzomchim aleim, you're not allowed to do smicha. What is smicha? Smicha is when they leaned on the animal. Here we have a picture, if my computer will behave and cooperate. So we have over here, the smicha was when the person bringing the korban would put his hands and he had to press on the animal, and you did the vidur, you did the confession, and you did your prayers. The problem is, like with those who join our halachic class on Shabbos, you're not allowed to touch animals and lean on animals on Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the question is, what do? You have to do smicha. You have to put your hands and do the confession on the animal. So how do you do it if you're not allowed to touch the animal on the Yom Tov? So this started the first machlokes. The first machlokes of the Yosis, of the pairs, was about if you're allowed to do the smicha on Yom Tov or not. And then there's a second argument that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel continued in this argument. And by the way, the argument was never decided. There was never that. This kind of was the machlokes. The first machlokes in Torah Shabbat Bez started. Do we do it? It got nasty. The Gemara tells us stories of when Hillel came and Shammai came, and the students of Hillel came, Shammai came. The kind of things got a little out of control with this argument. But the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel continued a second argument. Let's say even if you can't do smicha on Yom Tov, what does that mean? That if you can't do the smicha, and part of the sacrifices you have to do the smicha, are you allowed to bring? Then how do you bring the sacrifice on Yom Tov? So Beis Shammai says it's not a problem because you don't have to do the smicha on the day of Yom Tov. You could do the smicha. The smicha again is what the kohen is doing here in the picture, pressing his hands on. That's why we call smicha when someone becomes a rabbi, because it's the same idea. Moshe Rabbeinu put his hands on Joshua. That's the idea of smicha. So you're pressing your hands on the animal. So here Beis Shammai says it's okay. Do the smicha on Friday, Erev Chag, and then on Erev Chag, which would be the day before Yom Tov, and then on Yom Tov you bring the sacrifice, and it's ready. It's good to go. Beis Hillel says no. A, you're allowed to do smicha on Yom Tov, and B, you're not allowed to do smicha before. Smicha has to be done right before the sacrifice. So these two arguments come together, where at the end of the day, the bottom line is, Beis Shammai says you could sacrifice the chagiga meaning the shlamim on Yom Tov, but you can't do smicha on Yom Tov. You do smicha on the day Erev Yom Tov. Beis Hillel says you could do the chagiga on Yom Tov, and you do the smicha on Yom Tov. So the house of Hillel, the house of Shammai, continue to argue about this. They say even a story was that once Hillel the wise, came to the temple to do an animal, and they asked him what was the students of Shammai surrounded him, and kind of not to make machlokes, he said it was an animal, that it was a female, it wasn't a male, it wasn't a korban oila, and therefore they backed down. And because he wasn't ready to be strong with his opinion in public, they said a lot of the laws went according to Shammai in that day. It was a bad day for the house of Hillel because he wasn't ready to stand strong, and he kind of didn't want to make machlokes. He didn't want to make a big deal, so he kind of said it's a different kind of animal. It's a female animal, not a male animal. But this was with the argument. This is the argument we have now. So what did we say before? We said before that we have the Beis Shammai says you're not allowed to do smicha. We don't do smicha. We don't do smicha. So you bring the shlamim. You do not press your hands on it. You press your hands from Erev Yom Tov. But you're only allowed to do the shlamim. You're not allowed to do the korban oila, the burnt sacrifice. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says meviim shlamim b'Yom Tov. You could bring the shlamim on the Yom Tov if it's not Shabbos. Shehein meichel adam b'Yom Tov. This is what you eat on the Yom Tov. V'chsiv, and we have a verse to support that you're allowed to prepare food for yourself on Yom Tov. Like it says, ach asher yeichel l'chol nefesh. What you need to eat, you could do on Yom Tov. So you're allowed to do the sacrifice on Yom Tov. Shabbos, you're not allowed to prepare food. So therefore, everyone agrees we don't do the chagig on Shabbos. But you do not do the smicha on the shlamim before on the Yom Tov itself. Why? So he says, sorry if the sound was coming, the mic was a little far. It says, smicha shvusi. Smicha is a prohibition. It's a rabbinic prohibition on the Shabbos and Yom Tiv. Elohein mishum shvus lo yiroichem agab behema ve'elohein al elu shiakrivu b'Yom Tiv yismechu me'esmol. So like we learned that you're not allowed to ride an animal on Shabbos and Yom Tiv. So too you're not allowed to do the smicha, pressing on it. So what do? Yismechu me'esmol, you do it the day before. The less than the Beis Shammai take of the smicha shchita. Beis Shammai is not of the opinion you do not have to press the animal, do the smicha right before the slaughtering. So you could do it on the day before, and you do your confession the day before, and you slaughter the animal on the Yom Tiv. Avaloi Eiles. Beis Shammai says why? Because the verse says Asher Yechel Lechel Nefesh. That only oychel nefesh you're allowed to. And we're going to learn another verse that only says lechem, not l'shamayim. So what the food that can be eaten is only for you, not for heaven. So Beis Shammai says, therefore, burnt sacrifices can't be done on the Yom Tov. And that's why the statement of ma'achrin zman, that we push off the time of the chagiga, is referring to the burnt sacrifices that will never be sacrificed on the first day of Yom Tov, notwithstanding if it falls on a weekday or the Shabbos. However, Beis Hillel oimrim meviim shlamim va'oilais. Both the shlamim and the burnt sacrifices are brought on the first day, if you can, and we do smicha on the Yom Tif itself, because they disagree. They say that there's no shvus. This rabbinic prohibition doesn't apply in the Beis Hamikdash. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says avaloi oiles. Beis Shammai says you can't do the oiles sacrifice. So therefore, the statement of the Brisa would be according to Beis Shammai only, because Beis Hillel would say, if it falls out on the statement of the Brisa that says that we push off the Chagiga and the time of Chagiga wouldn't apply to Beis Hillel, because it's Beis Hillel, it's only Shabbos. If it's Shabbos, if it's Shabbos, we can't sacrifice. If it's in the week, we do all the sacrifices. Because they hold that the pasuk says lachem, and lachem means to exclude goiva. Goiva means heaven for Hashem. So Hashem does not, you don't have you're not permitted to sacrifice, to slaughter for Hashem the sacrifice, therefore you have to wait on that private sacrifice. We're not talking about the public sacrifices. The private sacrifice, which is for the individual, the oilas riyah, the burnt sacrifice will have to be done in the Chol HaMoed. But the house of Hill disagrees. You bring both the shlamim and the oilas, so what do we do with the word lachem? Because lachem means, seemingly, it's telling us something. So Beis Shammai says lachem means your sacrifices, not the ones you're bringing for heaven, because the burnt sacrifice is only for God. So Beis Hillel says that's not what that's not what it means. It means lachem for you and not for the nochrim. You're not allowed to do a Gentile sacrifice on the Yom Tov. Okay, let's do the Taisus. I want to bring down a little bit of halacha over here, because there's a lot of halacha questions over here. For instance, the Rashash brings down. Let's just see the Tosfos. Tosfos says this: I feel b'yom tiv ma'achrin. Everyone agrees that the burnt sacrifice, even on Yom Tiv, you do not do that. You don't do it. You don't do smicha. Even Beis Shammai says it's an opinion of Beis Shammai. You do not do the oilas riyah. We do not do the burnt sacrifice on the Yom Tiv. Hiksha harav Rebbe Chanan. Rebbe Chanan, who was one of the Baal Tosfos, I assume, asked the question: Mihad amrin perkam in the beitza shoychet oilas nedava b'Yom Tiv loika umasik the amri lach mani Beis Shammai. Because Shammai loitani oilas riyah the haver busitafi the afa gag the havet sarich Yom Tiv. Loika alibid Beis Shammai. This is a question basically asked, and it's in the Beitza that if a person brings a burnt sacrifice as a donation, not an obligatory one that's part of the Chag, so then you get lashes, because you're not allowed to bring it on the Yom Tov. So who's the opinion that says Beis Shammai? So what if you're saying Beis Shammai, you could already just say that even the obligatory one, forget a donation, you're not allowed to bring according to Beis Shammai. We just quoted Beis Shammai says that even the oilas riyah can't be done on the Yom Tov. Even though the you can't say that it's coming to prove a point that even Beis Hillel would agree that you're allowed to bring a burnt sacrifice of a donation, because Beis Hillel doesn't agree. He only says you could bring the obligatory ones, the ones for the holiday. But if you have a donation, bring a donation at a later point. Okay. I was thinking to learn another Tosfos. I was going to skip this Tosfos, but we already learned it. But it means to say is that you get lashes only if you bring a burnt sacrifice. But if you bring a a peace sacrifice that's a donation, you're not allowed to, but you don't get lashes for it because at the end of the day is isura mi'ika mishum dechsiv lachem. It should only be part of the holiday, but because it says lachem and it's food and you're going to eat it, you're allowed to. You don't get lashes for it. Okay. This completes the explanation of the brisa according to Rabbi Yehudah. So Rabbi Yehudah says we have a brisa that says the chagiga and the zman of chagiga gets pushed off, and he explains that this is the opinion of Beis Shammai, the house of, meaning to say that what does it get pushed off? It gets pushed off for burnt sacrifice gets the peace sacrifice gets pushed off if it's on Shabbos. Everyone agrees to that. The house of Hillel agrees to that also. No one says we sacrifice on Shabbos. The burnt sacrifice, according to the house of Hillel, of Shammai, gets pushed off to the Chol Hamoed, and where the house of Hillel says no, the burnt sacrifice and the peace sacrifice could be burnt on the holiday if it's not the Shabbos. And we also do the Semichah. We press our hands on the animal on the Yom Tov itself. Okay, that's the answer of Rabbi Yehudah. So again, just a few halachic points. The Rashash brings down a question that he just never mind the question so much, but the point is that we know that we have tashlumim. Tashlumim means that if a person, you have millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people coming to the temple, it's just not possible. Pesach, the Paschal sacrifice was obligatory to do it on the 14th, right? So everyone had to get on the 14th. You can't push off the sacrifice to the 15th. But the other sacrifices, meaning the burnt sacrifice for the holiday, for the private person, and the peace sacrifice for the private person, you try to do it on the first day. If not, you have a 7-day period throughout the Chol Hamoed to do it, and this also applies to Shavuos. Shavuos, obviously, even though Shavuos is 1 day, there's no Chol Hamoed of Shavuos, but we have the days of Tashlumim that, again, you have the 7-day period, like we're going to learn in the Gemara soon, to bring on Shavuos your sacrifices. But the question is, if you want to, and you can, to bring it on the Yom Tif itself, are you allowed to? So the house of Shammai says you could bring the Chagiga, the Shlamim, but you can't bring the Oilis Riyah. You can't bring the burnt sacrifice. What happens if it turns out that the last day of the 7 days is itself falls out on Shabbos? So now you really only have 6 days. So then what about, could you bring the sacrifices on the 7th day, that's Shabbos? So there is an opinion that says, the Im Chol Yom Tiv Achrim b'Shabbos, Chagiga doichaisei. The damil lizmani kavua, because then it becomes you have no option. You can't push it off to the next day. It's already after the 7 days of Tashlumim. I'm not sure why the person won't say that. If everyone knows the calendar that Shabbos comes out on the 7th day, right? It's not like it just pops up on someone. So why wouldn't we tell the person, make sure you get it in the Chol Hamoed of 6 days? Well, we know the last day is Shabbos. So that's another question. But the fact is that he brings down a halacha that from the Levias Chen, that if the last day of Yom Tiv falls out on Shabbos, and for whatever reason you didn't do your Chagiga then it would push on. You would do it on the Shabbos itself, which is a big deal. Okay, the next thing he says is after the 7 days, it's too late. You can't. There's nothing to push off. There's no pushing off. There's no pushing off after the 6 days. Okay. Let's continue. Hold on a second, just to make sure I didn't miss anything over here. Okay, let's continue. He says like this. Rava answers the Braisa's complicated wording like this. Chagiga kol zman chagiga machrin. The sacrifices of holiday get to be pushed off for the 7 days, the Yemei Tashlumim. Tafi loy, but that's it. You can't after 7 days, you can't pipe up on the 8th day and say, "Oh, I didn't do my holiday sacrifices. I want to, let me do my holiday sacrifices." It's too late. You only have a 7-day period. The Tanan Mishlei Chag b'Yom Tif. If you weren't able to bring your sacrifices on the Yom Tif itself, Harishain Shachag, Chaygig v'Hoylech Eskol HaRegel Kuloi v'Yom Tif Achin Shachag. You have until the last day to do all your holiday sacrifices, the ones that are obligatory. Over HaRegel, what happens if the holiday passed? It's past 7 days. V'Loi Chag, and you didn't get in your sacrifices. Ein Chay B'Chriyasa, then you can't. There's no bringing in. You can't fix that mistake. It's over. It's past the Avers Mani Batakal Bani. It's too late. He says, Rashi says, Kol Zman Chagiga Kol HaRegel Ad Yom Tov Akron Rashi Lashoisa. You could wait until the last day, but after the last day, again, you're not allowed to. Again, the Levias Chen says if the last day falls out on Shabbos, it would push off the Shabbos according to Levias Chen. Okay, let's see Reb Steinsatz's footnotes on this. Chagiga ma'achrin, the festival peace offering is postponed. The festival peace offering and the burnt offering of appearance, meaning the Riyah, Oilis Riyah, do not override the Shabbos. If the festival occurs on Shabbos, the sacrifice is deferred until after Shabbos. Again, this is the opinion of Hillel also. Hillel, no one says that you would sacrifice on the Shabbos. The question is if you sacrifice the Oilis Riyah, and do you do Semichah on the Yom Tov? According to Beis Shammai, you only do the Chagiga, the Shlamim, the peace sacrifice, and you do the Semichah, the pressing on top, and the confession the day before. And according to the house of Hillel, you do both the burnt sacrifice and the peace sacrifice, and we do the Semichah on the Yom Tov itself. If over a reg of lechag, if the holiday passed and you didn't bring the sacrifice, if the entire festival has passed and one has not yet brought the offerings of the festival, he no longer is obligated to bring them. This is a fulfillment of the verse, that which is crooked cannot be made straight. So the Rambam says it's too late. You can't fix what's been done. Okay, so that's how Rava understands the statement. Rava understands the statement that Chagiga is done, pushed off for Shabbos, and Zman Chagiga, as long as the holiday, you have time to bring your sacrifice. Once it passes, it's too late. Okay, Rav Ashi understands the statement the third way. Rav Ashi says Chagiga, v'chol Zman Chagiga machrin. Afilu atzeres, right? Because a person may say, okay, Sukkot and Pesach is a 7-8 day holiday. So I have all this time to bring my sacrifice. But Shavuos is a 1 day holiday. So what happens if on the 1 day I don't get my sacrifice in? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was impossible, or if it just was inconvenient. Even on Passover, most people we all know, right? Why do we eat afikomen? What's composed Pesach is coming up. Why do we eat afikomen? The afikomen is the matzah that we eat at the end of the Seder, right? And after that, we don't eat anymore. That goes to when the Jewish people ate their actual Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach was eaten after you ate your meal, ala soiva, right? When you're ready, means what did you eat before then? You ate your Korban Chagiga, your peace offering. That's why we have the egg on the Seder plate to represent that offering. So if the 14th fell out during the week, right? So if the 14th fell out during the week, so you did your Chagiga sacrifice and your Paschal sacrifice. You ate your Chagiga, that was dinner, that was your Shudas Yom Tov. On top of that, you had your little piece of lamb from the Paschal sacrifice. That's the matzah that we eat before benching, which is the afikomen. That's the Korban Pesach, ala soiver, when you're ready full. So obviously, everyone got their Chagiga in on the 14th. So it was possible. And then aside from that, you had to do the Korban Pesach. So if the Kohanim wanted to, even in the biggest numbers, you were able to figure out a way to get your shlomim, because everyone had to eat ala soiva. Everyone had to eat after the Chagiga. So I'm not sure on Pesach who really brought in, unless you ate from someone else's sacrifice and you brought yours later. But I guess there's different methods of doing. But I think if the priests wanted to, they could have got everything in on the first day. So it could be a convenience both for the Kohanim, right? It's like waiting online. You'd have to wait online the whole day to make sure it's easier to go on the second day of Chol Hamoed when it's less crowded and get your sacrifices and have a little more time and peace in the temple. It's not clear. Maybe we have to learn Chagiga to understand why they needed these 7 days. But what about Atzeres? Atzeres is only 1 day. Shavuos is only 1 day. So the Chad Yoim Ma'achrin, nevertheless, you have also, even though it's 1 day, you still have the 7 days. The Tanan Moedim, everyone agrees. Shimchol Atzeres liyes b'Shabbos, sheyom tibuch achar Shabbos. Which means what? Everyone agrees is talking about the house of Shammai and house of Hillel. Back to the argument. What happens because Shavuos could fall out on Shabbos itself? Now, everyone agrees if Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, you can't do any sacrifices on the Shabbos. We just said we don't do sacrifices on Shabbos. Forget to leave the Yaschen for a second. So we don't do sacrifices on Shabbos. So what do? We have 7 days to do it. So everyone starts on Sunday to do Yom Tibuch. Tibuch means the slaughtering day, which is after the Shabbos, not on the Yom Tiv itself. Let's see. Rashi's going to tell us a little bit more, and then we finish the subject of the Chagiga, and we go on back to Purim. Rav Ashi says, Chagiga calls man shnemer by Chagiga ma'achrin im ba b'Shabbos afilu atzeres she'eni el yemecha tashlum yeshla. You don't have to be worried. Even if Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, you still have tashlumim, which is known as the yemei tashlumim. The days tashlum means the days to fill, to be mashlim, to complete that you have 7 days even during the Shavuos holiday to bring your holiday sacrifice. After that, that's why we don't say Tachnun halachically. We don't say Tachnun from Shavuos until the days of Tashlumim because it's kind of quasi-holiday. Kol Shiva v'adayin yesh lo zman liyakriv, you still have time to bring your sacrifice. Umoidim batzeres, everyone agrees. Shechol is b'Shabbos, what happens if Shavuos falls on Shabbos? The Maseches Chagiga teaches us, Nechelchu batzeres shechol is b'Erev Shabbos. There's a disagreement between the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel if Shavuos falls out on Friday. Shvei Shammai omrim yom tevuch shel atzeres acher haShabbos. That Beishami yom tevuch shel atzeres acher Shabbos. Meaning to say, Nechlu batzeres shechol is b'Shabbos. If Shavuos falls out on Friday, so Bishami says the Yom Tevuch, the day of slaughtering for Shavuos afterwards, is on the Sunday. Bishami, according to the opinion, you can't do the oil on Yom Tov itself. Okay, so the question is, when do you do the slaughtering for the oila? The house of Shammai says you can never bring the burnt sacrifice, even if Yom Tov is during the week. So when is the Yom Tevuch? When is the day of slaughtering for the burnt sacrifice? You have to wait till Sunday. Friday you can't do it because it's Yom Tov. He says you can't bring a burnt sacrifice on Yom Tov. You can't because he has the limit of Lachem. Shabbos you can't, obviously it's Shabbos, so you have to wait on Sunday. The house of Hillel says no. Bring both sacrifices on Friday because you're allowed to sacrifice an oila, burnt sacrifice on Yom Tov. And we do the Semichah on Yom Tov like we said. Hilkach lo yakriva Shabbos, you have to wait till Sunday. Beis Hillel says no. Ein l'yom tevuch, that's not the day of slaughtering. Ein tzarich lahamtin l'yom tevuch shashlamim v'oilis krivim b'yom tov, because you're allowed to sacrifice both the peace offering and the burnt sacrificing on Yom Tov. However, the house of Hillel agrees that if Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, everyone agrees we do not sacrifice not the peace offering or the burnt offerings on Shabbos. Then we wait for the day of slaughtering, which means the day afterwards, which would be Sunday. Clearly, we see that everyone agrees that we have days to make up. Because everyone would agree that if Shabbos falls out on Shabbos, you can't do the sacrifices. So then you think, that's it, I lost my opportunity to bring a Yom Tov sacrifice because there's only one day Yom Tov. No. This idea of Tashlum is not just if there's Chol HaMoed, it applies even if there is Shavuos. So if anyone ever wonders, why don't we say Tachmin? What does it mean that up until the 12th of Sivan, it's called Yimei Tashlumim? It means that these are the days you have to bring the sacrifices in the times of the temple. Okay. That closes this subject. Let's continue. Go ahead.
Just to be clear then, so for the actual Korban Pesach, this is about the Chagiga, but for the Korban Pesach itself, there's none of this notion of being pushed aside. Everyone has to do it in the Zman, regardless of all the considerations, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's...
That's exactly a great point. So when our Pesach, meaning the night of the 15th, falls out on Motzei Shabbos, right? We have Matzash. We have Friday the 14th, and the 15th is on Shabbos. So Friday night, Saturday night, Friday Motzei Shabbos, which is the Seder night. We switch around the bracha. We say min apsachim min azvachim. Why? Because then that night we don't have permission to sacrifice the Chagiga on the Shabbos. So they would only sacrifice the Pesach, because Pesach overrides Shabbos. And that's I'll get to that in a second. Pesach overrides Shabbos. You would always do the Pesach on the if the 14th fell out on Shabbos, you do the Pesach. You do not do the Chagiga because we don't do Chagiga on Shabbos. So therefore, they didn't eat the Korban Pesach ala soiva. They didn't have the Chagiga. It doesn't mean they starved, but they didn't have the Chagiga to eat before the Korban Pesach, and that's why in the bracha at the end of this, before the second cup. When we say alas min azvachim umin apsachim, so usually we say min azvachim umin apsachim. That's if Seder falls out any night besides Motzei Shabbos. Why? Because first we have the Chagiga and then we have the Korban Pesach. We eat it ala soiva. But if it falls out on Motzei Shabbos, we're not allowed to sacrifice the Chagiga. And we only sacrifice the Korban Pesach, and that's why the nusach is min apsachim and min azvachim. We switch it around because we didn't do the zvachim until Sunday. And how do we know that we could do the Korban Pesach on Shabbos? So actually that's how Hillel became Nasi. The house of Hillel is started by Hillel, the elder, When before Hillel was Nasi, there was the Bnei B'Seira were the Nasiim, the children, and study more who the Bnei B'Seira were, but they were the leaders of the Jewish people. They're not Shmaya of Avtalion, so Shmaya of Avtalion kind of with the tradition, but the Bnei B'Seira were considered the leaders of the Jewish people until it came a Shabbos. What happened? It's a weird story. Until it was a Shabbos of the 14th, and he forgot if they're allowed to sacrifice the sacrifice of Pesach on Shabbos. And Hillel made a whole. That's the whole idea of the Kal V'chomer. The idea that we have the 13 midas of Torah is, so it used to be 7. Rabbi Yishmael took the 7 of Hillel and broadened it to 13. And Hillel used all 7 rules to prove that you're allowed to sacrifice the Korban Pesach, which is obligatory for Bo B'Yom on that mistama the svar of the Levias Chen, while you're allowed to do Achron Shal Pesach, Achron Shal Chag, the Chagiga. But he has all the Lemudim that says that you're allowed to sacrifice the Pesach sacrifice on Shabbos. And then they had a question, what about the knives? Are they allowed to bring the knives on Shabbos? And that he said he forgot. If you're allowed to bring the slaughtering knife on Shabbos, because you're not allowed to carry. So he said the Bnei Yisrael and Nevi'im, Bnei Nevi'im, and the prophets, the children of prophets, and they had them. The animal itself carried the knife, and then that's how they did it, if I remember correctly. But to answer your question in long, short version, yes, the Korban Pesach is on Shabbos, the Chagiga is never on Shabbos, and if the 14th of Pesach of Nisan falls out on the Shabbos, they did the Korban Pesach, but they did not do Chagiga, and therefore they did not eat the Korban Pesach halaseiva. The Rebbe has a beautiful talk. And Ruchnius, what does it mean not to eat the Korban Pesach halaseiva? He spoke in 1951. But either way, and then the Korban Chagiga was sacrificed on the Sunday of the first day of Chol. Okay. Now answer your question, Rabavi? Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. Sure, no problem. Omer Rabbi Lezer, Omer Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Lezer, the son of Rabbi Chanina, it says in the name of Rabbi Chanina, a story. This is a beautiful piece of Gemara on Rebbe. That Rebbe, the author of the Mishnah, not a netiya bepurim. Rebbe planted a tree on Purim. Now we're going to go to the question if you're allowed to do work on Purim. So if everyone wants to know if on next week obviously you have to ask your rabbi, but if your job is something that you have to go to, but if one should work on Purim. That says Rebbe planted a tree on Purim. And it threw everyone into panic. How did Rebbe plant a tree on Purim? We'll see what the question is. So the Gemara says, V'rochatz, more than that. Rebbe, aside for planting a tree on Purim, V'rochatz b'kroina, let's just say b'kroina shel tzipori, in the wagons of Tzipori, on Shivas b'Tammuz, on the 17th of Tammuz. And this is Rebbe, and Rebbe is not just the Nasi, Rebbe is the Nasi. There's no one else in history that has the title of HaNasi, even though they were Nasi. Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi, the prince. Ubikish la'akar Tisha B'Av, and he even wanted to uproot the holiday of the fast of Tisha B'Av. And that already didn't let him do. So what are we talking about? What did he do, and what was his violations exactly? So here it comes in the complicated question about how do we understand, first of all, what did he do on the fast? What was the day of the fast? And second of all, why is it taka that the fast of Tisha B'Av is so much more severe than the other fasts? For instance, we don't wash, we don't wear shoes, we don't leather shoes, relationships, all the halachas that are forbidden on Tisha B'Av don't really halachically apply to the other fasts. Why don't we find all the fasts as severe as Tisha B'Av? So here, kind of that addresses that question. That's why Rebbe bathed publicly. Bekroina shel tzipori means, however you're going to translate the word bekroinai, the wagons, but means to say he did it in a public. He wasn't hiding that he took a bath on the 17th of Tammuz, which is a fast day. So Rashi says B'kroina shel tzipori means b'yom hashuk, in the day of the market, meaning b'fresia, publicly. B'shas hilach kroinis, when the wagons were going in and out, Rebbe bathed so everyone could see you. He didn't sneak into the bathhouse. Doesn't mean he sat there and made a pool in public. But it was obvious for everyone that Rebbe was going to take a bath. When it comes to Rebbe, so Rashi is very clear. On Tisha B'Av. That not that they didn't agree with everything, but they didn't agree with what he wanted to do on Tisha B'Av. We're not clear what he wanted to do. We're going to see in a second what the story was with Tisha B'Av. But about 3 things Rebbe did. One was he planted a tree on Purim. Second thing was he bathed publicly on the 17th, on the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, and he wanted to uproot the fast of Tisha B'Av. Okay, we have to understand, this is not, one does not draw conclusions from this Gemara, because we're going into the question really of the laws of fasting. Fasting, we all know that the halacha and the custom of how we do it is we all fast all the fasts, and it's not for us to say that today we're not in a threat, etc., and therefore we wouldn't have to fast. But what's the basis of this whole thing? So the Ritva says like this, that halachically all the fasts should be as severe as Tisha B'Av. But in Rebbe, the Gemara in Taina says that there's 3 times. There's the time when things are bad for the Jews. There's times when things are good for the Jews. And there's a time which is called She'ein Shalom ve'ein Shmad. It's not great. Ein Shalom means it's not majorly peaceful. Ve'ein Shmad, it's not a time that people are trying to kill us. We're kind of on pins and needles, and that was the time of Rebbe. Rebbe, we know, had a fabulous relationship with the Caesar, with Antinous, but kind of thing, it was still the Roman rule, and the emperor himself had limited strength. So Rebbe was in a time which was called Ein Shalom ve'ein Shmad. And so therefore it says, in the Rosh Hashanah it says, that if it's in a time of Ein Shalom and Ein Shmad, it's kind of not here, not there. So it says, Ratzu Misanim, Ratzu Misanim. Then you can decide if you want to fast or not. If it's a time of peace, you don't have to fast. If it's a time of Shmad, of when they're trying to persecute the Jewish people, we always fast. What about not here, not there? One could argue that's maybe our time. I wouldn't say we're exactly Shalom, but we could say that our time is Ein Shalom, Ein Shmad. So the Gemara itself says, Ratzu Misanim, Ratzu Misanim. Therefore, meaning the Ritva says like this, because really Shiva Asar B'Tammuz should be as severe as Tisha B'Av, but because his time was not Shalom and not Shmad, it was kind of not here, not there. Therefore, Lachirach Rebbe B'Yizam Tammuz. That's why he bathed himself. So the Ritva says if that's the case, maybe he also ate. If he bathed himself, maybe how do you know that he even fasted? And the only reason the Gemara mentions that he bathed because that's what he did publicly. Maybe he ate privately. But he says, Mistaver, it makes sense that even when we say that birotzi, lay birotzi, if you want, if you don't want, is only talking about the severity of the fast, meaning not to bathe, etc. But eating, even today, even in a time which is Ein Shalom and Ein Shmad, we still fast. And he says, the Ritva says, we have to understand, it's not from a minhag. It's not just out of custom that we fast, but it's because this is what the Prophet said, that the fast of the 17th is the fast of the 17th, doesn't get uprooted like the Rambam writes until Mashiach comes, until it says Yom Simcha. And therefore the Shulchan Aruch writes, just saying the law, that the 4 fasts are, you're allowed to wash yourself and oil yourself, and the only thing you're not allowed to do is the eating. And the question is also the reason why some people say the reason why we don't have the severity of Tisha B'Av and the rest of the fast is because of just it was too difficult for people. Okay, but let's see what Tosfos says. Rabbi Steinsaltz, I think, gets more into detail about this below.
Just answer one quick question.
Sure.
What's the reason for planting a tree besides saying you can work?
That's the question. The Gemara is going to ask if Rebbe was able to plant the tree on Purim because you're not supposed to work on Purim.
But what's his reason besides that? Is there any other reason?
The Gemara is going to address it. Oh, if you're talking about the Gemara is going to address it in this. Well, hang tight. If we get today or next week, we'll get to the Gemara addresses that question. Okay, obviously he didn't sit in a Tosfos says he didn't sit in a wagon of water. Like that's a little exaggerated, but it means that he bathed publicly. So Tosfos asks the question of the Ritva, maybe he also ate. If you're saying it's because Kedetani Rosh Hashanah, we learned in the tractate Rosh Hashanah, and we actually learned it in our class before we learned Sanhedrin, Ein Sarav Ein Shalom, if it's not a time of oppression for the Jews, but it's also not a time of peace, I will comfortably say that's the kind of time we're living in now. Then you don't have to fast. If you want to fast, you could fast. If you don't want to fast, you don't have to fast. So this is the psak of Tosfos. Because our forefathers have accepted upon themselves. Rebbe also did, and therefore we all agree that fasting is fasting. The Ritva adds it's not a minig. He says it's gzeres hanavim, and therefore he fasted, surely he fasted, but the bathing he wasn't so careful. He bathed. Again, one who learns in Shulchan Aruch, therefore it says, just to finish off, there is a concept of a machmer alatzmi tavlei bracha. There's certain things that we say, for instance, relationships on the Shivas Patamas clearly says in the Shulchan Aruch, that's brought down in I think it's the Ramah or the Magen Avram, that says that a machmer is someone who's careful not to have relations on the 17th of Tammuz, tavlei bracha, you should have a bracha. Okay. B'kesher la'akar Tisha B'Av. What is it? V'loy hoide kasha. What does it mean he wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av? Heichi salka daitach. What's even the thinking of the Gemara before we even explain what this means? What did we even think that he wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av? The high Tana, the Rebbe, that you're saying Rebbe, such the leader. He writes al akar Tisha B'Av. The Gamri v'amrinan. We learned kol ha'echa v'shaisa b'Tisha B'Av any rayv nechama. If you eat and you drink on Tisha B'Av, you're not going to see in the salvation of the nechama of Yerushalayim. How could Rebbe take uproot Tisha B'Av when one court can't just uproot what another court did? Like we learned about the members of the Great Assembly. You have to be greater in wisdom and numbers. And I'm not going to finish the statement, but Tosfos is basically saying Rebbe didn't have that authority. Rebbe didn't want to, even the thinking, we're going to see that's not the conclusion, but in the thinking, Rebbe wanted to make Tisha B'Av like the rest of the holidays, meaning you don't have to wear non-leather shoes, and you don't have to, bathing is not so strict, and relationships is not so strict. This Tosfos is very schwer. Tosfos says, because there's an argument. Like Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says that based on when the temple actually burned, the severity of the burning was really on the 10th. So Rabbi, according to Tosfos, could be Rabbi wanted to move it from the 9th to the 10th, like Rabbi Yochanan says that if I was there when they made the fast, I would have made it on the 10th. But then that doesn't really, first of all, that doesn't answer the question of how could he uproot something from the Bezin. The Bezin already decided it's the 9th. Like Rabbi Yochanan says, if I was there, but he wasn't there, therefore he can't change it. So why would Rebbe want to change something if he doesn't have the numbers and the strength to change it? So it doesn't that some people are still questioning what Tosfos means with that. Okay. Let's see Rebbe Steinsaltz's notes. Okay, apparently from the Greek word, what is a kroina, meaning a spring or a well. So that makes a little bit more sense that he kind of went to a public spring, so then of flowing water, and he washed himself, bathed himself on the 17th of the fast of the 17th of Tammuz. This translation suggests by the Aruch as well. Alternatively, the word may be in the Greek karon, meaning a car, a cart of a wagon. All right, so I think we said that Rebbe did it in Tzipori, right? So where's Tzipori? Just for the map. I don't know how people familiar with Tzipori. Tzipori is till today. I was there once. So if you want to just look, because the Gemara is going to go into the whole question, where did Rebbe live? Do you know that then Jewish people lived kind of in the north? So if I'm not mistaken, so here, if you're looking at the map over here, this is Tiberias. And Tzipori, I think, is over here. So it's a kind of, it's in the hills. Yeah, so here's Tzipori National Park. So here's Tzipori. If you take the 77 today, you're going to go down to to Tiberias. Rebbe traditionally lived in Tiberias. That's what we're going to learn. He's kept Purim in Tiberias, and Tiberias is a question to be a city of the 15th, not the 14th. So Rebbe could have lived in Tiberias for various reasons. He moved north towards Tzipori. I think one of the reasons was for health. Tzipori is in the mountains, better ear. Anyone who's been in the summer in Tiberias knows it's sweltering hot in Tiberias, very hot place. So that's not too far distance, but it's still a distance west towards the Mediterranean, up in the mountains, up in the hills of the Galilee. Okay, so Reb Steinsaltz says, where's Tzipori? Tzipori was a large town in the Upper Galilee, and the perennial rival to Tiberias. Okay, it was the rival of Tiberias for the recognition of the religious capital of the Galilee. So they weren't sure what was there was two cities that kind of fought over who was the capital of the Galilee, whether it was Tiberias or if it was the Tzipori. During the Second Temple period, it enjoyed special status among the towns of the Galilee due to its large and learned Jewish community. Among the Tanoim who lived there were Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Reb Chalafta, and his famous son, Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta. Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi moved to Tzipori toward the end of his life. and it was the seat of the Sanhedrin for about a generation. Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi's leading disciples lived in Tzipori. Rabbi Shmuel, son of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rebbe, who was later appointed Nasi, his brother Reb Shimon, Rabbi Chanina bar Chama, later the head of the Tzipori Yeshiva, and Rabbi Yanai. Even after Sanhedrin moved back to Tiberias, Torah scholars continued to live in Tzipori. Among them, the important Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Chanina of Tzipori and Reb Mana. Okay, so Tzipori was a city that rivaled Tiberias. Rebbe lived in both cities. Most of his life, Rebbe lived in Tiberias, which was kind of the capital of the Galilee. And then at some point he moved up to Tzipori. So when did he bathe publicly and on Shivas B'Tamas and plant a tree and try to uproot the Tisha B'Av was on when he was in Tzipori. The Rashba writes regarding the washing oneself on the 17th of Tammuz. So the Rashba, one of the Reb Shlomo ben Aderet, writes that Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi's behavior was in accordance with the principle set forth in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, where it states that in times of peace, one need not observe the fast day of the 17th of Tammuz, the fast of Gedaliah and the 10th of Teves. In times where there are evil decrees against the Jewish people, these fasts are obligatory. And in times which are neither peaceful nor times of evil decree, right? Lo shalom v'lo shmad. These fasts are optional. During the time of Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi, these fasts were optional, yet the Jewish people had accepted upon itself the obligation to fast, even though they didn't have to. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi was of the opinion that this voluntary acceptance applied only to the actual fasting. This is all the Rashba clarifying what we learned from the Ritva and the Tosfos, but not other prohibitions of the fast day, in other words, bathing. There are those who add that according to the comment of Reb Abba bar Zavda, the 9th of Av occurred on Shabbos. If that incident of Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi bathing on the 17th of Tammuz took place in the same year, it would mean that 17th of Tammuz also occurred on the Shabbos and was postponed to Sunday. Perhaps Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi was of the opinion that in such circumstances, the entire fast should not be observed. Okay, so Rabbi Yaakov Emden says that could be that when he bathed was the same year that we're going to learn that was on Shabbos, and therefore the fast of the 17th of Tammuz was pushed off to the Sunday, and Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi is the opinion that you don't push off a fast. So therefore he publicly bathed, and could be he also didn't fast that year. But in general, he doesn't hold you. No one holds that you don't have to at least fast on the 17th of Tammuz. Based on what Rabbi Yaakov Emden is saying, is maybe he wouldn't have bathed in public either. Okay, La'akar Tisha B'Av, Tosfos explains that Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi didn't seek to abolish the fast completely, but rather to abolish its severity and make it equivalent to the other fasts. The Ritva expands upon this idea and explains that according to the original enactment of the fast of the fast day by the prophets, there is no difference between the 9th of Av and the other fast. So according to the Ritva, in theory, Shiva Asher B'Tammuz also you should have to keep the severity of Tisha B'Av. Consequently, although the sages did not want to make fasting on the 9th of Av optional during the times when there are no evil decrees against the Jewish people, Rabbi Yehudah HaNasi sought to equate it to other fast days with regard to other prohibitions, in other words, bathing and wearing leather shoes. So the Ritva says all Rebbe really wanted to do was to make it less severe. Okay. Either way, the Gemara continues that that's not really what happened. Rabbi Abba bar Zavda explains what happened on Tisha B'Av. Rebbe loy kacha yemaisa. This is not the story. El Tisha B'Av shechol is b'Shabbos. This was a Tisha B'Av that fell out on Shabbos. The 9th of Teves, the 9th of Av, fell out on a Shabbos. Udichinuhu la'achar Shabbos. They had a fast on the Sunday. You don't fast on Shabbos on Tisha B'Av. V'amar Rebbe, and this is the famous Rebbe. The Rebbe would quote this all the time. Hoyel v'nitcha yidache. If it's already pushed off, push it off. If you already were not fasting on the day, forget about Tisha B'Av. The Rebbe would use it as a way of strength, as push away gullus. If it's already pushed off, you don't have to. Okay, we're going to fast the next day. It's pushed off. But the rabbis didn't agree with him. So who is the first person? Rabbi Lazar, I think it was, says, "Thank you. Two people are better than one." Rabbi Lazar named Rabbi Chanina, because you explained that it wasn't like Rebbe wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av totally, but that Rebbe just wanted to uproot it if it fell out on a Shabbos. This is Amar the fun of Rabbi Lezer, only that year. And he says, I would have made a mistake and thought that Rebbe wanted to uproot Tisha B'Av totally. He told me the truth. Okay, we have 5 minutes, so let's just go a little further and address a little bit of Aaron's question about what was the story with the tree. Okay, so he says like this. Rebbe, hold on. The Gemara goes back to the first. First of all, you have to. It's interesting. Usually, we know Rashi teaches us from a lot of places, many places in Torah, that you're supposed to keep things in order. For instance, when Eliezer meets Rivka, he asks Rivka 2 questions. So al rishon v'al achron achron. Rivka answered the first question first, and the second question she answered second. Means you have to keep things in order. We find that interesting. This Gemara jumps on the question of the 17th of Tammuz and on Tisha B'Av and forgets about the first statement that he planted a tree. First, we should have addressed the question of planting the tree, and then gone to the 17th and fast of Tisha B'Av. But it seems like kind of next to the statement we wanted to cover that issue to be able to get back into the real subject at hand, which is Purim. So Rebbe Hechinat in a Purim. How did Rebbe plant a tree on Purim? V'hatani. Something else. The Gemara is just making like a statement. What do you mean? Like Aaron says, why would he plant a tree on Purim? Like, why is that an important piece of information? Obviously, it's an important piece of information. He's making a statement. Like he made a statement in bathing, and like he tried to uproot Tisha B'Av. Obviously, in that same subject, you can't say one thing was just a passive thing that Rebbe did that has no significance, doesn't mean anything. And the other 2 statements is that Rebbe is making a statement by doing what he did, by bathing in public or wanting to uproot Tisha B'Av. The fact that we included it all in one group means all 3 of the things that Rebbe did was for a purpose. So it's obviously the Gemara kind of takes it as without even at first as if it's just casual, and then asks the question. So it's a little bit interesting that the Gemara didn't jump on it immediately. But either way, the Gemara asked, Rebbe heichinot in Purim. How did Rebbe plant on Purim? V'atani Rabbi Yosef. We learned Rabbi Yosef teaches Simcha u'mishta v'yamtiv. We have a verse of Esther 9:19 that says that the holiday of Purim. Okay, this is where it gets complicated. It's not so clear what we're going to learn the story a little as it gets on. That what Esther and Mordechai wanted to do wasn't 100% accepted. They tried to make it an actual holiday. The Jewish people accepted partial of what they wanted. So initially it says they wanted Simcha, that should be a day of happiness, Mishta, festivities, V'yamtiv, and a day of holiday. Yamtiv means holiday is holiday. Simcha malamich asur mehesped. Simcha means you're not allowed to eulogize. Mishta malamich asur b'tainis. You feast means you're not allowed to fast. V'yamtiv, what does it mean yamtiv? Malamich asur b'siyas malacha. It should be like any holiday. You're not allowed to do work on the holiday. So how did he plant the tree on Purim? You're not allowed you have to keep it as a holiday. Which we all know that kind of the end result is that we're not supposed to work. It's not a time of bracha to work, but we don't have the stringent. It's not a holiday. So the Gemara answers first. The Gemara is going to kind of talk it out a bit. The Gemara answers this is the beauty of the Talmud, because if you just give an answer, then you don't get all the information. So when you talk it out a bit, in the talking it out, we learn a lot. Rabbi bar Arbei Sarhava. Rebbe was one who kept the 14th as Purim. When did he plant? He planted on the 15th. So he didn't plant on the day of Purim itself. He planted on the season of Purim, because Purim is 14th and 15th. 15th in the places that are walled, 14th in the places that are unwalled. He was a person who kept the 14th. So therefore, when he planted on the 15th. He didn't live in a city that was surrounded by walls. And we'll get back to the Tosfos next time. The Tosfos basically asked the question about if even hesped, what does it mean you're not allowed to eulogize? Avelis is midiraisa. So this becomes a big halachic question, which we have to discuss a little more detail next time. But hesped is midiraisa. Avelis are not hesped. Avelis is midiraisa. Purim is Rabbanan, is rabbinic. So you can't just say that, what's the halacha? What is it? How do we actually behave when it comes to Purim, when it comes to if a person's in mourning, in the 7 days of mourning, the first day of mourning, if you bury on Purim, what's the halachas? So we'll discuss that more next week. I just want to give a little further in the Gemara. So the Gemara says that you can't say that Rebbe is a 14th guy and he planted on the 15th. Well, Rebbe B'Tveria have it, right? We just learned before that Rebbe is in Sipori, but Rebbe really lived in Tiberias, like I showed you on the map. That's by the Sea of Galilee. That's by the Kinneret, and he lived in Tveria. B'Tveria Mekafes Chayma, and Tveria is a city that was surrounded by a wall from the days of Joshua, i.e., it's the day of the 15th. So how could he say he planted on the 15th because he's the 14th person? So the Gemara obviously answers, the Rebbe bar Chamesaver, Vechinata bar Beyasaver. Okay, so let's just switch it around. He kept the 15th, therefore he planted on the 14th, which makes more sense because he did something that's the traditional day of Purim, and he planted it on the 14th, but he kept the 15th. All right, we'll stop here. We'll go back. Aaron, don't worry about your question. It's going to be addressed about what kind of tree he planted. Then we're going to learn that he planted fakert, a tree of Simcha. That because Purim is a day of happiness, he wanted to plant a happy tree. I don't think we're doing next week, actually, because I think next week is Purim. We'll be in touch. Stay tuned to your WhatsApps to know if we have a class or not. Laila Tov, everyone. Take care. If I don't see you before Purim, happy Purim.
Thank you, Rabbi.